Park. It will be closed off starting about the end of August through the fall season. We'll also have construction fencing with that parking by Benoist Park around that playground up to the baseball field and up to the tennis courts. So that entire area will be another part of this construction phase. I just wanted to remind everybody, and then it'll be back to normal and by spring. The practice field will be able to be used. Yes.
Just a question about that. Will there be any parking at the Benoist Park at all?
There may be some, but not much. We need to enclose that entire area as part of the construction staging area.
Okay.
Any other questions on the Timview project? Okay. Also one other thing which is impressive, Westland Construction has done a great job as construction manager. For this small phase, they received over 140 bids from subcontractors and suppliers, which is one of the reasons we have some good competitive pricing for this first step. So it's a good step in the right direction for that project. Also with custodial operations and the Department of Facilities for our schools, head custodians and all custodial operations are ready to go for next week. They're ready to go knowing how they'll be assigned to certain areas. We continue to hire as many people that we can to help us with the disinfection needs. And since I last updated you, we've been able to hire more people, not as many as we'd like, but enough that it's helpful, starting at our 2 high schools especially. And then we will also have a good portion of our district maintenance staff. We also have them assigned to various schools on the first day of school. So they'll also be helping disinfection teams and rotations. Traditional work orders will be tabled. If there's a legitimate emergency, our maintenance staff will respond. We'll have contractors available to help respond. But we're trying to get as many people as possible to just disinfect all day long, every day. And then we're also, we have 2 people that will be dedicated to manage airflow as much as needed and all day long, Monday through Friday, and for evening events, whatever those events may be. And I think some of you, maybe all of you have seen a statement I released just to help answer some questions about how we'll manage airflow. Before school starts at every single location, we'll pull in outside air for 2 to 3 hours before school starts. We'll then do that again as soon as school is out. And as outside temperatures allow, we'll also do that during the day, as long as we can keep interior temperatures where they should be for required temperatures interior. Any questions about any of those steps? Okay. I know you've got a lot more to talk about tonight with other things, and so that was my update for construction. Other than that, our capital projects for this summer went well. If you have a chance, stop by Franklin Elementary. You'll see there's new carpet tiles throughout those hallways, all their main corridors. It helps improve the look and the sound and kind of a softness to those hallways at Franklin Elementary. So that's just one example. Any questions?
Mark, I have a question. I noticed several of the elementary schools I drove past got new asphalt on their parking lot, and something more major looked like it was happening at Wasatch. Could you explain the reasoning behind the new asphalt at those other ones and what's happening at Wasatch?
So every year we have ongoing asphalt maintenance at all locations. Sometimes it's what's called a seal coat, where we just seal an existing layer. Some locations, like if you look at the east side of Canyon Crest, we did more than that this year. It was in disrepair, and we needed to improve that. So some locations you'll add a layer, some you'll just seal and restripe, but that's what's been happening with all the schools. Rebecca, I did get a note from you. Sorry I haven't responded yet.
That's okay.
But we'll get the stripers back and ask them if we can add some arrows down at Provo High School.
Thank you. That would truly help the traffic flow.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
And Melanie, your question, I forgot to mention this. A lot of people have asked what the large concrete pad is on the west side of Timpview High School, just off of Timpview Drive outside of the auditorium. That is a concrete pad for a 4-classroom portable pod. It'll arrive sometime mid-September is the timeline right now. It'll have 4 standard classrooms. It'll just help Timpview with a little bit of extra space over the next 2.5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Superintendent Rattel, will you please address item E, policy review?
Thank you. This is the largest agenda item on the agenda for tonight. And so I'm going to have various members of council come forward. Todd is going to talk through the metrics that he is proposing as we move into the different phases. Jason will then come forward and talk about some things that are going on with HR and some of the challenges. Alex will talk about what's happening at the elementary schools. Doug will come forward as well, and Marie, and then we'll go to that point. So Todd, come on up.
Good evening. We sent to the board yesterday a draft document. Contains data that we have received from both the state and county health on how we should handle quarantine and class and school dismissals. In addition, there's a draft of proposed metrics for consideration when moving from phase 1 to phase 2. So at the top there, what we have heard from both the state and the county is that any student or staff member that's tested positive. Is this better? Okay. Any staff or student that is tested positive will likely be quarantined up to 14 days. And then through contact tracing, anyone that has been exposed to that individual in our schools may also be asked to quarantine. In addition, the state has come out with guidelines stating that within a 10-day period, if we have any 3 individuals in a classroom that are tested positive, that classroom will be asked to move to online for 14 days. And that if we have 15 individuals in any school, that we would move the school to online for 14 days. I think it's important for the board to be aware of those guidelines, as even as recently as this last week, we've seen a little bit of an outbreak in one of our school areas that, had we been in session, definitely would have triggered the class dismissal and would put us close to that school dismissal. As far as the phasing, we've worked very closely with the county health, also taking information from WHO and the CDC to look at metrics that would help us determine when to move from phase 1 to phase 2 and from phase 2 to phase 3. In all the information that we have received, and looking very closely at those systems that have been able to open up successfully, the key factor has been control or containment of the spread within the community. That seems to be the one underlying factor that has jumped out the most. So the indicators that we propose are, one, to look at the rate of positive tests. And in that first transition from 1 to 2, that we're looking for a rate that's less than 5%. And then moving from 2 to 3, that we're looking at a rate that's less than 3% in our community. But we don't want to rely solely on a single indicator. So the other indicators that we're looking at would be the number of cases, a case count within a community over a 2-week period. The county health has really good data on this. They actually divide the city into thirds. And so the transition point would be less than 100 cases within a 2-week period that would move us from, potentially move us from a phase 1 to a phase 2, and then less than 50 cases within a 2-week period that would move us from a phase 2 to phase 3. In addition, we'd want to make sure that our schools, we're not seeing that spread in the schools. And so we'd hope and want to make sure that we've had 0 cases within all of our schools over a 1-week period before we'd make a transition. You know, it's pretty evident You know, what we're facing is really a public health issue. It's a community issue. And unless we're able to really do a good job as a community to contain the spread, it's going to be very difficult for us as a district and as individual schools to be able to manage the situation well. And so we're going to do the very best we can in terms of mitigation and safety, but we really need to enlist the help of our community as well to make sure make sure that we have a full school year. And so questions at this point in terms of the data that's been shared?
Yeah, I have some questions. Okay, so if we set the limit at 5%.
Yep.
As I see it in Utah, you know, we have a bit of a denominator problem because let's say you think you have COVID, you can't get a test unless you know someone who has it, so you think you've been exposed, plus you have symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And so by having those requirements, it's going to keep that number high. It used to be in Utah, you just had to be exposed and then you could get a test. And when we had that, the rate was like 3-4%. But ever since they've added that second requirement, it's knocked it up to like 9%. And sorry, my mask is really annoying. But if we look at, like, there's a lot of countries that have really good numbers. You can say like France or Singapore or, you know, even Sweden now, where they have low COVID numbers,
Yeah.
but their rates are still like 10% or 13%, or I think France is like 20% right now, because it's all a matter of how many people get tested, who gets tested. So if we set that goal at 5%, it seems a little bit not in keeping with the way we are testing in Utah.
No, I appreciate the question because you're spot on. We have a testing issue. Right? We need more testing to be able to address that denominator issue that you described. And that's why I think it's really important that we have more than a single indicator. So it's not the positivity rate in and of itself, but it would be a marker that we would look at in comparison to the case rate over 2 weeks, as well as the cases within our schools, as well as a number of other factors. But I do believe it's important that we do have some quantifiable metrics for us to guide us. Not that they are the sole determinant, but they are a factor for us to look at.
Okay, so just to be clear, we could be less than 100 rate, less than 100
Less than 100 cases within 2 weeks.
within 2 weeks, but still have a higher rate. And there's a possibility we could move to phase 2.
There's a possibility of that, yes.
Okay.
And Todd, when you say 100 cases, are we talking Utah or our county
That's
or our city?
It's actually broken down into 3 sections of the city. So if you were to go to the county health website, it has a good interactive map that has broken up the county into sections. And the assumption is based, I believe, on population. So Provo itself is broken into thirds. So there's a West Provo and East Provo, and then a North Bench BYU section. Currently, all 3 of those sections are in the high, what they consider the high rate, which is over 100 cases in a 2-week period.
So then would it have to be all 3 sections of Provo or just by school?
Again, that's a great question. We've had a lot of conversation about, you know, if we had areas of the city or specific schools that seem to be doing better than others. The struggle we have is as a system, it's going to be a real challenge for us to be able to treat one part of the city differently from the other. And so our recommendation is that it's district-wide.
Do you want to speak to transportation on that, Todd?
Transportation.
Because that is one of the.
Yeah, one of the factors, again, is transportation. It's all the services combined together. To have one school that's on a different schedule than another, again, it would just be a real management challenge for us to make that workable.
When we're talking about those testing rates, the number that I see thrown out there all the time is the state. I know I saw last week where it's broken down further. So do we have something that's broken down just like what you just said, the 3 sections of Provo?
On the test rate?
On the test, the positive testing, right?
So we've been working with the county health on how to do that for ourselves. And so we believe we've come up with a means to do it. We haven't run the numbers as of yet, pending board approval on using this as a metric, so we should be able to do that.
Okay, because I know last week, and I've tried to track it down again, and I couldn't, so I may have
So
just.
it would be a matter of us pulling together, for instance, yesterday it was 23 new cases in Provo. And then looking at the testing rate within Provo and doing the arithmetic for that.
Well, I saw something, and I can't track it down again, but kind of to Nate's point was, there was, like I was seeing the testing rates for different areas.
Yeah.
Provo's was
Yep.
over 10%. There were some areas of the state that were significantly less,
Yeah.
that they were already under the 5%.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, so somewhere that data exists. I tried to find it again and couldn't. But yeah, I'd be
Yeah.
interested in
You
seeing
know,
that.
another great metric that it's in the same line that would help us is the Georgia Tech data that, again, has broken it down by county, and it's a probability statistic. And what they have shown is that if we have a group of 50 individuals in Utah County, any part of Utah County, the likelihood of one person being infected is over, I believe it was over 70%, 60%. If it's 100 individuals, so you think of our schools, even at 50% capacity, having well over 100 students in a school, it is of 9. So that it's almost a surety that he's carrying at that point in the school year.
And then can we clarify where the percent number, because that's not something that we just made up, right?
As a metric to measure to.
Right, like who has decided that 5%
That was
is?
the 5% was initially, to my understanding, was a recommendation from the WHO, and then has also been put forward by the.
And I think too, the Utah Department, right, within this came all the way.
That's where it originated with those organizations. It's trickled down to our county.
Right. Wanted to make sure that wasn't, we were rolling. Yeah.
It's really hard to create metrics of thin air that we have identification for what metrics to use or look at and consider. It's tied back to the expertise of those that have experience in this field.
Is there any way we can get a daily update of what those rates are that you're looking at? Or,
Certainly, we could pull it together and send that information out.
okay.
So I have a few questions. First of all, I want to thank you because I know we've given you a task that it's unprecedented and we don't know what we're dealing with until we actually get into school and see how this works. So thank you for that.
I've learned more about epidemiology in the last 2 to 3 weeks than I ever cared to, so yes, thank you.
Not quite in your field, huh? I do want to say I agree with Nate that I don't know that the percent positive tests is a metric we should put a lot of weight to. I think it's more about the cases. I also feel that having 0 cases for a week within our district is unrealistic because we do know that the virus is going to spread. It's about mitigating it and doing all we can so that people stay safe, but we are still going to get cases. I think I'd rather look more at outbreaks and how many of those are we having or close to outbreaks, right? I also feel that we actually have an advantage having Nebo and Alpine having a different system set up where they're sending all their kids at once. And that's the next phase we want to move to. Have you factored at all into looking at comparing how it's spreading in our district versus theirs? And if we're about the same, why shouldn't we put all our kids in at the same time?
I appreciate that. 2 responses. First is to the percentage rate, and I'm very open, and we'll take the guidance of the board on this if you would like us to look at other metrics rather than the percentage rate. I think we need to, though, understand that the dilemma that Bryson brought up, denominator, also works the opposite direction, that if declining number of tests, but see an increase in percentage, it may be an indication that you have a continuing spread in the community. So I think we just need to look at it both ends and continue to look at the experts of the department, but we're very much open to looking at other metrics. In regards to your question about comparison to our neighboring districts, absolutely, we want to look and compare our data to their data and see what's going on there and how they're moving forward. But again, I think we also have to recognize that our demographics are very much different than theirs. We're starting to see that even this last weekend, where news reports of students coming back to college, and we're going to see up to 30 to 35,000 new residents to our city that will be attending the university. They're not making what we had considered maybe really wise decisions, and so we just don't know the impact that they're going to have on our community's health. And so I think we just recognize that our dynamics are a little bit different. We also know that this disease is hitting certain segments of our population much harder than others, particularly those that may not have access to health care, that were early on identified as essential workers and didn't have that luxury of isolating. They're suffering at a greater rate. And Provo's demographics show that we have a higher percentage of those families than both Nebo and Alpine. So yes, we want to look at that, but we also have to recognize our demographics are very different.
Todd, how are we going to identify the number of cases in any particular school?
Well, absolutely. So we've set up a system. Again, this is guidance from the state down through the county health department, and we're working even more closely with them than we have in the past. We've identified a point of contact at every school, which will be our principal. And when we have someone that's been identified as positive, their physician or their healthcare provider enters them into a state database, and that information then trickles to the health department, who then is communicating with our point of contact at the school. So they don't share health information per se, but they're simply saying whether or not you have a positive individual in your school. We're collecting that data back from the schools centrally so we can track it here as well. Again, because it's important for us to know, because within a 10-day period, if we, again, have 3 or more in a class, that's going to move a class to online. If we have 15 or more in a school, that's going to move an entire school to online. So we're tracking it very carefully all the way down to the classroom level.
Will we be receiving those updates on a daily basis?
We will, so the point of contact is reporting to both Alex and myself on a daily basis. We may or may not have infections reported at that time, but they're going to report the conditions of the school situation in terms of our practices. And we're sharing that out with our safety committee, which will begin meeting daily starting tomorrow. And so we'll have this continual feedback loop with what's going on the ground in the schools back to the district, and hopefully we'll be able to keep our eye on any outbreaks or situations that may occur.
Thank you.
There's a couple things. So without HIPAA or FERPA information, how do we know what class they're from?
Which class they're from?
Yeah,
Well,
especially a secondary student that has.
Yeah, that's a good question. So where we're able to kind of balance that confidentiality piece rather carefully is that each of our schools have a school nurse, and our school nurse is actually a shared employee between us and the county health. So our school nurses, as in their role as county health employees, are getting that information, and then they're able to kind of bridge that gap for us to help us understand, okay, they're in this class or that class, and we may not know all the details around that, but we are able to manage it much better than we would have.
Are the people at the county communicating to you when any of the rapid testing models are going to come online, that it's not going to be necessarily from Test Utah or where,
Yeah,
we might have
that's,
something.
I think we're all anxious for the rapid, the site-based testing where we get the results back more
Are they
quickly.
talking about that at all?
I haven't heard a word about that as of yet.
I shared with the board earlier today. So Ben Abbott, one of our good professors here at BYU, he had great success in putting together that sort of literature review for masks that sort of at least convinced policy makers that, policymakers don't say, oh, the masks are up in the air anymore. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
He put out one today about schools. And in school actions, I noticed that 2 of them involve communication mechanisms. Are we looking at changing any of our mechanisms? How we get feedback, how we communicate with the public, and how, we have public updates? Yeah, because as he identified those as best practices.
Yeah, we're looking at that document very closely. I've made my way through the executive summary and now doing the deep dive into that document. And we definitely we're going to look at that and bring it up with our safety committee on how we can make improvements, recognizing that communication is key. Communication from the health department to our schools, to the district, from the district out to the community, from our schools to our community. We really got to bridge that gap and make improvements there, because again, this is not necessarily a school or district problem. This is a community problem, and it's going to take all of us working together. And the only way we can do that effectively is through communication.
Right.
So
we used to just be in a 50-50 world, and now we're in a 50-50 angry and scared world. And so emotions are high, and the only way we can help that is if we involve everybody in the
Absolutely.
conversation. They've got to be in the conversation.
And it speaks back to one of the findings is, again, about community spread, that the schools are only a reflection of what's going on in the community, and we can't do this by ourselves. That the schools that have done this really well, the spread was less than 20 per million. And right now for Utah, we're about 120, I believe it is, per million.
So one last thing, if we should just probably move on because we're taking up a lot of so much time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Todd, I have a couple of things for you. Has the health department reviewed your metrics?
They have.
Okay, and their response was?
Very positive.
Okay.
Very positive.
So they're supportive?
Ongoing communication with Suzanne Livingston, who's the director of all the school nurses in the county. She's worked with Dr. Flinders. They've reviewed our proposal and gave us very positive feedback.
Okay, I have one more thing. Oh, sorry, Keith.
I just had one more thing. At some point, I know Melanie attended the safety committee meeting last week, and she might want to give a little bit of a weigh-in on what she saw, but I'll defer to you.
My last one is, it says 10% or 15 students. So we don't have a single school where the 10% would come into play, because our smallest school is Independence, and our largest is Timpview with 2,200 students. So like if 10% can be good at some schools, but at Timpview, we close the whole school down if we're at 0.6%, like 0.6%. I mean, it seems like that's kind of arbitrary and not really based on, actually looking at the numbers. I don't know. I was just wondering where we got those numbers and
Those are numbers that came directly from the state health department, who put out a COVID-19 school manual. And how they derived those numbers, I couldn't speak to. We're just taking it straight from the manual, what we've been advised to.
So there's not a lot of flexibility with that one, since it came from the state.
I didn't read a lot of flexibility into that, no. I think the flexibility was 10% or 15, whichever number is lower, is how it was portrayed.
So we're toast, is what we're saying.
Well, maybe one question. Do we have an idea going into school? So I firmly believe that with all the things that we're doing, that we're not going to have a lot of transmission in our schools. But the community problem, so infection is going to come in our school. Do we have an indication going into the year what our situation is?
We're starting to collect that feedback. As I mentioned, we've had a little outbreak in one of our high schools, and we're collecting that data now as families and students are going through the testing process. So I know that in one school the one school that I mentioned, we have at least 4 students and 2 faculty, and it may be as high as 10 students.
So what's the mechanism for collecting that information? I mean, besides,
So we receive the information early through self-disclosure from the families. And now the health department has circled back in the last day and started to verify that to us.
I just want to say one more thing. Is there a way that when we solidify these metrics, exactly what they're going to be, get them on our website? So parents know what they're
Absolutely.
looking at as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I just want to mention what Keith was asking me about being part of the school safety committee. I sat through that 2-hour meeting, and there's a lot of information that it needs to be disseminated to the teachers, which then needs to be disseminated to all the students. Going to the half students is going to make this a lot easier because school's not going to look the same. And getting those new protocols and safety things going is going to help tremendously with the smaller numbers as we move forward.
Todd, just before you sit down and we pass the microphone to Jason, could you speak about any specific things at the secondary level that the board may want to know about? And if there's nothing, just you can pass.
In regards to
Just updates.
the virus, we're off and running, met with all the principals today, and you know, I think what was interesting is usually the first day back for staff, there's a lot of energy. They reported that they see the excitement in their teachers' eyes, but it's different this year. People are muted a little bit. Just not sure what to expect. So I think it's cautious optimism is how I'd phrase it.
Todd,
I
before
have a
you leave.
question. So I wasn't sure when the right time to ask it, but it sounds like maybe with you, Todd. So I feel like we need to be very good at educating our students, especially the secondary students, that their choices outside of school matter. Like, I actually think school's the safest place for them to be because they have to have their masks on, they're gonna have to wash their hands. But when, especially teenagers are hanging out, they're gonna be spreading the virus, and they're gonna close down school that way. How are you going to educate them, inspire them to be careful at home? Do we have plans in place? Are we talking to the teachers about how they can talk to the students?
Well, and I think, yes, within our schools, we can control and send that kind of message. And I know, you know, it was an eye-opener for all those that received this initial report about students this last week, with the realization that it's not going to take much, and we could be shutting down a school for a period of time. We could be shutting down certain activities for a period of time. You know, that three-person positivity impacts athletics the same way it would a classroom. So really trying to share with them the reality, and then really I think we've got to do this in partnership with our families. Our parents have a role in this. They've got to help us, and the broader community has to help us. For us to try to do this alone, my fear is it's going to be an almost impossible task by ourselves.
I would just suggest that we come up with a messaging plan
Yeah.
so that our teachers are all on board and understanding that's the message that they can be telling their students daily.
Yep.
And how can we communicate that as a district and the principals from the schools to share it with positivity, but
Yep.
like we all got to keep doing this outside of school. too.
Absolutely.
You brought up a point that I'm just wondering if this is the time to ask it, but sports, what are we seeing with sports right now?
So the update on sports, they're moving forward. In fact, both high schools, I believe, have their first football games this Friday. All the athletes have been going through symptoms checks each and every day in coordination with our school nurses. In many ways, I think they understand that the choices that they make will impact the season that they have. We have an agreement within our district and all the districts in Salt Lake County and in Alpine on spectator behavior and how we're going to manage that. All the districts have agreed to cap in spectators at 25% of capacity. We're requiring distancing, masks, all the health guidelines as well. So we're trying to do everything we can with again, by sending that message. I mentioned this in our last meeting. It's one thing to open. We can open schools next week, and we can have a football game this Friday. But if we're not doing our part, if we're not being really cautious, we're not going to stay open very long. And our goal is to stay open all year long. Our goal is to have 0 infections in our schools. And so we're working towards those goals and trying to do everything we can to make that happen so that we're not taking away from the experience of our students.
Todd, there may not be an answer to this question. I was just curious. But given that in any large-scale testing, like we're approaching now, there is always a likelihood that we may have a false positive or a false negative in test results.
Yep.
Have you received any word as to how the county health will respond to that in terms of reporting so that we know whether there is the necessary number of infections for modification or not?
Yeah, we haven't received any word, haven't even reached that point in the conversation with them about that, but it's definitely something we'll put on the agenda with them.
Are there any other questions from the board? Thank you, Todd.
Jason, just to reassure you, you don't have to take as long as Todd did. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's not a criticism, Todd. Thank you, though.
Well, I appreciate that. They also told me as we were waiting for Todd to finish that because I'm short, I can use the mic at the podium. I don't need to use the other mic. So hopefully you can all hear me. I appreciate this opportunity. I'm going to speak to you tonight about our employees. Todd mentioned we had our teachers return today. We had a lot of positives happening at our school buildings. I went out and visited 3 of the schools and saw the interactions between the administrators and the faculty, and it was very positive. It is interesting, though, because the mask does kind of mute even the energy in the room. It seemed that faculties were positive about the return, but they were really quiet and reserved, and I think some of that had to do with the masks. But we were excited to welcome them back. I wanted to discuss with you that we've had teachers approach us for concerns over COVID and their own health and also health of family members. We've worked with each employee who has approached us on an individual basis to see if ADA accommodations were possible or if FMLA was a possibility to work with them for their family members' sake. We are also using the federal leave for those who actually do test positive or who have been asked to quarantine. So we've been working through those cases, again, on a case-by-case basis. At this point, we have a lot of the personnel movement kind of situations resolved between asking people to go to e-school for the students who've chosen to take e-school as their option. I've been somewhat surprised at the number of students who have enrolled in e-school. It's not as large as we thought it might be. And so we have a lot of people excited about returning to the buildings. We have asked a few teachers from our elementary level to go to e-school to support our elementary students who've signed up there. And we came to those decisions based on people who have concerns of health issues and have approached us about that option of teaching at eSchool. We also have been working with the choice numbers on the secondary level for our eSchool, our BYU Online courses, or BYU Independent Study courses. And we have a number in the secondary level, mostly at the high schools, where we're able to fill that typically with buying people's preps or providing people with a stipend to cover the instruction of those students. With that being said, there's a couple of people who still have concerns and they are unresolved, and they have come to us asking for a leave of absence. Now, the number is not very large. We're talking less than 5. And our leave of absence policy has a time frame where it asks them to have appealed for this early in the spring. It's a board approval item. And I come to you tonight asking for your permission to work with these employees on them being able to take that leave of absence based on concern for family members. It's not their own health that they're concerned about. It's that they're taking care of family members at this time. We would be making the decision on whether or not they can have the leave of absence based on the hardship for the school and whether or not we feel like we can have a qualified person working in their place, and we could work with the principal on having someone supervise students who are there in the building and covering all the students who are signed up for that location specifically. So again, most of those items have been able to work themselves through. We start the process by sharing with them the PPE that the school district has purchased. And after many of them reviewed that, as they approached us, they said, you know what, I'm great. I just wanted to know that there were some measures taken to keep me safe. And so a lot of them have chosen to be in the classroom after approaching us. But then, again, we've worked with a handful on ADA accommodations, FMLA leave, and also now we do have a small number that are asking for this potential leave of absence for the year.
Jason, could you explain what a leave of absence formally is?
Yeah, you bet. So a leave of absence is that the person takes leave for the year. They don't receive, any kind of salary, but they stay in our system as an active employee to be able to return to a position the coming school year. The people, as they ask for this, we explain that it doesn't guarantee the exact position that they're currently in, but it promises them a position to return to for the coming school year. They also understand that, taking the leave of absence, they give up their insurance benefit. They do not accrue URS time towards their retirement during this year. So all of that is explained to people as they ask about this potential leave of absence. And most of these cases, people are working with family members who have some very serious health conditions, and their concern is over bringing it home, of course, but also just the need to potentially be there to serve their family members currently during this pandemic. So those are the reasons people have approached us at this point about the leave of absence.
One quick follow-up. How are we fully staffed at all of our schools?
Yeah, great question. We are fully staffed. It's very interesting that always this time of year we have one or two that last minute decide to do something else. And we had a couple of those cases just about 2 weeks ago, and we were able to fill those positions. We went through the hiring process today. So right now we aren't seeking for any positions, but again, there's always one or two that could come up over the next little while depending on family circumstances. But like I said, we've had a really positive response to people returning, and they've done a great job. In fact, I would like to just take a minute to say, I know our state superintendent has described the need to be nimble as we work through these times. Both building level principals and teachers have been very flexible and very understanding and very supportive of the work we've been doing to try to help them to be back in the schools. And they want to teach. They want to be there for the kids.
So to clarify the leave of absence issue, we're asking for you to allow Jason to work with those teachers who are in need of requesting that right now, give him the flexibility, and then we'll come back to you at the study session at the end of the month, or if it's still continuing at that time, to come back at the first board meeting in September to formalize it through board approval. But Jason has to be able to make placements and deal with people going on leaves and those kinds of things within the next week. So we're anxious to be able to move ahead on that. So unless there's any real grave concern about that, we promise we will bring you the information that you will need to make this decision later on.
Can I just add one thing? You asked how we are in staffing. Am I not on? Hello? I gotta say closer. Just an FYI, we are still trying to hire about 7 bus drivers. If we don't get them hired by the time school starts, we may have to make some adjustments to routes, but Troy is working frantically to get those positions filled, so.
And how many custodians?
I know of the new positions Mark was trying to hire. I think he's got, what, Jason, about 25 hired. Transportation's going to help out with that on Fridays when they're not driving routes. But just an FYI, in case you hear any rumblings about transportation, we are currently short 7 drivers.
Are there any additional questions for Jason?
So Jason, I appreciate you telling us. So it sounds like that, I mean, it's a fairly significant sacrifice to take care of a family member and do that. Are we twisting anybody's arm to be, I mean, I want to know sort of the edge situation that might show up, later on.
Yeah, great question. I feel like we've been working through this, in a very positive way, and employees have gotten to the point of making that decision based on the fact that as we go through these phases, there's a point at which they could be asked to be in the school all the time, and this concern for a family member has led them to making this decision. We've given them several options prior to that decision, and so in them getting to the decision, it really is over this concern, this high level of concern over someone that is already very ill in their family.
What about the other way of staying in the classroom? Is there any case, I mean, what's the level of cases where people go, I really wish I wasn't here, but I have to have the paycheck?
That's a great question. The people who've come and meet with us as an HR team, again, we've had very positive interactions. We do have people who have had to work through ADA accommodations because of their own health and will not necessarily be in the classroom when we're working to accommodate them through other means other than a leave of absence. But again, we really, to this point, haven't had a lot of negative interactions. We've had high level of concern, but not really negative interactions.
Great. Well, I work with a lot of school districts around the state, and I would feel most comfortable sending them to you. So, and I have. So thanks for being who you are and your department operating the way it does. So.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Any additional questions for Jason? Thank you, Jason.
Come on up, Alex.
I'm the shortest one of the group, so sometimes leaning over is a little bit harder. So I'm excited to be here tonight. Thank you for letting me be here, board, and to give you some updates with the elementary side of things. So the last time we met, a couple of conversations came out. We were wondering about recess, and so last Thursday, the state put out some recommendations for following some recess guidelines, and those recommendations came out, and as a elementary administrative consortium, we met together and kind of talked through those, and right now there isn't a whole lot that we would deviate from. In fact, we're not going to. We're going to follow what they've got, and there were some key points that we're going to allow kids to be able to go to recess just like always, but we're going to work on making sure that there's staggered recess times just like we have in the past, but be a little bit more definitive in making sure that those times are followed with our teachers as well. The other things we're going to be looking to do is just to make sure that we teach the kids how to social distance. This is going to be a little bit more of a trick in the elementary ranks just because tag is what we do. Nate, you're welcome to come join us on a playground and play tag with them. The kids just, that social side of it is going to be difficult, but our administrators recognize the challenge there, and we're going to be working on making sure we teach them the T and staying 6 feet apart as best they can, and recognizing that they're kids and just helping them to understand the impact of what they're trying to do and be safe. The one piece to this that's going to be a little bit different than we had initially thought was we were going to work on having them wear masks, but they recommended that they don't wear masks outside. And so on the playground, the kids are not going to be required to wear masks, but what we will do is when they go outside, we're going to require them to hand sanitize. Then when they come back inside, they're going to hand sanitize as well. The other piece of this is a little bit different than what we had initially thought, was that we were going to disinfect the whole playground after every use. And their guidelines are saying that that's not a good use of time, it's not a good use of your resources, but they said more to just look at the high-touch surface areas and wipe those down as frequently as reasonably possible. But they do say just follow the regular cleaning guidelines or regular cleaning regimen that you would with your playground equipment. So Jeff Hawkins has been working with us on this, and he is going to try to get his custodial crew involved at least once a week, making sure that we somehow have used the sprays to clean it down or use their misting systems to help that way. Otherwise, we're going to be working with our school personnel to help throughout the day do the high-touch surfaces where there's railings or there's flat surfaces in plastic and metal to be able to clean those up. So those are the updates on the playground right now and what we're doing. Any questions with the playgrounds? Good, thank you. I like that. That's
I will
awesome.
ask one.
Oh, dang it, yeah.
As far as like playing with balls, jump ropes and such, how did those get sanitized on a regular basis? And that such.
Yeah, so that's the playground equipment, and we're going to work with our teachers. They're going to each have their own kind of playground equipment within their classrooms and help them to sanitize those after they're done playing with them at recess. They're going to encourage games such as kickball, where they can socially distance and still be able to kind of kick the ball. There is some touching of the ball, but again, this is one of those where risk reward, how much are we going to be like, you can be out on the playground, but you can't touch each other. They're being creative. Principals are talking about using like hula hoops to play tag with, so that they bump each other with the hula hoops, not touch with the fingers. So there's lots of creative ways that the principals are already formulating ideas to be able to help, be able to give kids the opportunity to interact and play and be social while still maintaining the health
Just
and the
as long
hygiene
as they
issues.
don't lasso each other with those hula hoops.
True that, true. Okay, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, have the principals been given guidance to have, and this might be a dumb question, like extra monitors on the playground, you know, teachers out there, they're going to be more of them, so we don't have one teacher out there trying to monitor all of this on their own?
So that's one of the unique things about this year. Chris Chilcote kind of summed it up best when he had his faculty meeting today, and he played the song Into the Unknown over and helped his staff recognize that we're entering a different era. We are going to be utilizing paras as well as employees, teachers, to be a little bit more involved in not only hygiene but also supervising, because it's going to require us looking at how do kids enter the building, how do we stagger release times, and on the playground saying that your first and second grades are going to play over here, second or third and fourth grades are over here, and kind of designating areas, but that requires a little bit more supervision as well. So teachers are aware of that. Some principals have been very creative in saying that some of their staff is saying because of the shortened school day, they're more willing to be flexible during that lunchtime to be able to say, how do I support the administration and make sure we're supervising kids as best we can. PEA is willing to say, okay, let's find ways to get through this, especially the first couple of weeks, just to say, let's get some routines down and some normalcy to what we need to do, and then figure out what are the sticking points and then start working through that. So hopefully that answers that for you. Okay,
Any additional questions?
Yep,
Go ahead.
The other question, the other piece that we've been working on, and thanks to Stephanie and Jason, Melanie, you were part of this conversation, was the kindergarten schedule. Initially, with some of the restrictions on our transportation and the number of buses and bus drivers that we have some limitations on our ability to be able to get that midday bus between all of our schools, being able to release and get them to school, and then turn around and then quickly do it again. We were running into some transportation issues, and we worked with some teachers, Melanie, Stephanie, and Jason, to find a solution that would allow us to be able to run kindergarten midday so that they can follow the regular early out schedule on a regular basis, where they're able to go twice a week instead of just once a week. And that will be more conducive to learning for those kindergarten kids, giving them an opportunity to be able to be in the classroom more frequently, building those routines and procedures, and the teacher establishing that relationship. These kids are learning through social means, and not being able to meet with them more frequently was a real hindrance to those kindergarten teachers being able to make that really effective time for once a week all day. So anyway, so thank you to those that helped out, especially our transportation department. They've made a huge sacrifice. Those bus drivers are really going to be pushing to be driving for significant time.
We're just going to call on you to come drive the bus.
Yeah, I'm going to go get my CDL so I can fill in when I need to. But anyway, so those are the two big things that we've been working on right now. There is a lot of hesitancy and a lot of reservation with our staffs. We visited a couple of faculty meetings today. They're excited, they're hesitant, yet at the same time, they're spread apart 6 feet or more. They've got the masks on. There's just so many questions that they don't know. Principals are still excited to have them back. They're excited to get going. There's just lots of questions that they're working through, and not having all the answers sometimes make it a little bit more difficult for our staffs to get as excited as they want to be, knowing that there's a lot of questions out there. But any other questions for me?
I was just going to ask on kindergarten, and maybe it's based school by school, but are they still starting about a week later than the regular?
Yeah, they'll still follow the regular regimen. So the state has adjusted the deadline for getting the kindergarten assessment done, but it's still going to be required. So we're going to try to allow our teachers the regular time frame that they need to be able to get that testing done, and knowing that there's going to be probably some testing that'll need to be followed up even after school may start. So we'll work with them on that one. Okay, thank you very much.
Doug, are you next?
What are you hearing in DLI, and how's that going, those conversations?
Dual language immersion is, for the most part, what I've heard is there's a mixed on that one, but for the most part, it's positive. They're willing to work with them, knowing that they're going to be going to school one day for that dual language, target language, and then the other day is going to be their traditional English class in this first phase. There are a few parents that they want their kid to have a little more consistency, or they're looking for a different option, and so they have gone to either an online option where they've got like a French or another language to be able to, but it's not dual language immersion. And we're working with any parent that's making that request this year to be able to support them and saying we'll hold their spot for them for 1 year. So, okay, thank you very much.
Good evening. That's a hot mic. There we go. Good evening. My pleasure to visit with you a little bit about things going on in student services, as well as to speak specifically to a policy that's before you today as well. So first of all, just to get a feel for what is going on in student services, we have been working hard since the time we identified what our return to school plan is, of course, and then going through a process and essentially trying to enroll everybody. On a normal school year, that takes place during the spring months. We've been kind of trying to get that all done within about a 2-week period of time, where we identify what classes kids are going to take, what their schedule is going to be. There's been a significant pinch on teachers and administrators to identify, based on what it was that
students chose of our options for our return to school plan, what it was that they then can plan for when kids arrive at school. And to a large degree, I think it's probably some sort of statistical prediction work that we're doing here, as it's hard to get everyone to respond. But gratefully, for instance, with the elementary survey that we launched a week ago, we're around 75% response rate on that. As we have been able to then get that information back out to principals, they can identify who's chosen which of our different options, whether that be in person as often as available, whether that be the home study option or the e-school option. I think it's important to really message and over to the individuals we work with the critical nature of us seeing that this is in its in its just base level, it is an online returning to school program that we have, with the number of days that someone receives in-person response varying based on its availability and what their choices are. So with that in mind, the critical piece here for student services is to make sure that everyone can get digitally connected with the learning. So we spoke about this in the spring, and just again, we have been able to gather information through this enrollment process on individuals who are self-identifying as candidates who need more support of getting their kids online. So we've been able to get data that we're beginning to run with now, and utilizing the donation that, if some of you can recall, that we received from Google Fiber, as well as money we've set aside in our foundation to support the digital access issue that we saw as being a critical issue for so many of our families last spring. So we have already purchased through that foundation grant about 50 hotspots that are ready to distribute to families as our team identifies those requests where someone can't get initially on the Google Fiber, which is, of course, is the immediate go-to where that's available, where someone's connected. Being a community where that type of a free service is available, we want to utilize that first. But there is a percentage that does require some sort of interventions as it relates to finding some other sort of an online access option. We appreciate technology, of course, working really hard to get us to the one-to-one initiative, to where we can make sure that everyone has a Chromebook, but that Chromebook, as you well know, is not worth anything if you can't get online. So we're working really hard at this point to now take that data and put together a task force that, and my director, Jason Garrison, and others on my team are really working hard to get to these individuals who now have said to us, we need your help. And we're beginning to implement that as a layer of support as we look to the return to school plan. Another conversation I just want to keep you up to date on is that in the last board meeting, you'll recall that you made a motion and voted to approve essentially the holding on our attendance policy for this upcoming school year, right? It's just as a necessary thing as it relates to our working with students. We still have the requirement to have students receive 180 days of educational experience, but it's challenging to then say, how can we verify they've done that if they're not coming to school every day? So we've had a team, actually, we worked and got some good work between technology and the different assistant superintendents today to identify some ways that we can ask teachers to give us regular feedback on participation and engagement of students. That this would be an additional mark that we can make. The proposal right now is that we do that Fridays, that we have all teachers go through their roles and identify on a rubric scale of from 1 to 4, what it is that is the participation level of the students that are on their roles. So this could be the home study students, or this could be those that are attending in person for the 2 days that's our current phasing report response. That's a critical piece, we feel like, for schools to identify who is really normally engaging. There will still be the progress that's in there about grades and progress toward the standards, but a critical piece for us that we don't want to get weeks, if not months into this, is to not know that students are regularly getting online and participating. And the number one indicator for knowing that would be the teachers and their accountability that would be in place with the students. We feel like this mark would also be very helpful for parents to be able to see as they sense the engagement of their students. So all things related to that are what Student Services is emphasizing. Just quickly, I want to point you toward the policy that's on the agenda today. It is a policy that is kind of a little bit overarching around things related to pandemic, which it makes sense that we don't have very many of those on our policy books because it's been 102 years or so since something like this has occurred. But it's a policy that just essentially states that we understand there will need to be contingency planning for educational delivery, some flexibility around some of our policies. I think the one that Jason presented to you about timelines, about claiming a desire to take a leave of absence is a perfect example of why a policy like this would be helpful for us to have in place. But then it specifically speaks to some things that come to us as mandated requirements for health and safety around the idea of face coverings. So behind that policy, you'll see a procedure and a form that indicate how it is that we plan to define what our acceptable face covering is, what's the process by which we will enforce that, and then also how does one appropriately ask for an exemption to that. The form that's included is the process that walks people through that exemption request process. It's the form that is also being used in our neighboring districts in Nebo and Alpine. So gratefully, there's some consistency that our patrons will see as to how that's being handled countywide, and it again has the endorsement and support of our county health department. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions or follow-up you'd like to give on anything I've presented this evening.
What's the number on your list of access problems?
Number on the...
Yeah. You said you had a list. What's the number?
Oh, well, I just give you a sample of just what I was working with this afternoon with John Anderson at Dixon Middle School. He gave me 15 families that he had learned of over the weekend. So again, we're looking at it as, while there might be 15 there, those are probably also families that have students that are down at Dixon and might have, down at Franklin, could be at Provo High. So when we take the family-based approach, I think that we're going to be able to identify how to solve the problem for the whole family.
Great.
Are you talking about a few other things? I don't want to cut you off.
No, thank you.
Oh,
I'm good,
okay.
Julie.
No, and I don't know if you're I think this is a student service issue, but a question that has been raised a few times, and I know we talked about this in our last meeting, and it's come up a few times, but can you talk to us a little bit about what arrangements we're making as far as food for our kids and those students who won't be getting the meals? And again, I don't know if you're the guy to talk about that, sorry.
It's a great
Yeah,
question, but I think Stephanie probably has enough
Right, that's what I'm
updated
not
information
sure.
on that she can share.
I'm sorry.
So what we've done is with the kids being on an A-B schedule where they're in Monday and Wednesday or Tuesday and Thursday, the days that they're in school, they'll be able to get it's going to be all grab and go to keep it clean and simple until we get a routine, and then we'll start adding on. But they'll obviously eat their meals the days they're in school, at school, and then they will have their breakfast, if they choose, and their lunch for the next day packed and ready to go for them to take home for the next day. So they don't have to come back to school on Tuesday just to pick up meals. And then Tuesday, we'll do the same thing. Those kids will eat in Tuesday, they'll take home Wednesday meals, so forth and so on. The Friday and the Monday, there's a little bit of a shift. I'm trying to remember how she's working out, but she's set it up so that they can take home the bulk of their meals. If they're electing to do just homeschool, but they are enrolled at one of our schools, the parent can call in and they can pick up an entire week of meals at one time if they want to, or they can call in and they can schedule a couple days worth. And then the only kids that don't qualify for meals are those that are actually enrolled in e-school, because they're technically not enrolled in a brick and mortar school. So we have the waivers to be able to do some of that. We don't have the waivers for complete free and reduced yet. The other thing is those areas where, like the Boulders, for example, where the boundaries are kind of weird, they can go to another school and get their meals if they need to.
And we have a number of students that are part-time e-school, whether that's secondary kids taking some. If they take any courses with us, they qualify for our food program, I believe. Great question, Julie. Any others that I can handle from student services?
Any other questions for Doug?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Doug. Superintendent Rattel, anything else with our policy?
Well, we could go on and on and on, but the reality is this is a dynamic situation. Melanie, did you get enough time to represent what you wanted to say based on the safety committee meeting?
Yeah. I'll be going to each of these meetings starting tomorrow, so feel free to reach out to me if you have questions.
Okay. And I asked Anne Marie to go last on this presentation, not because she's not as equally as important, or I don't know that she has any updates, but she can present to you in detail one of the things that we asked you about. I know that we've skipped over a couple of other items, so Anne Marie, as soon as you're done, I assume, Jim, you'll just take over and take us through the rest of the agenda.
I will.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think in the interest of time, the issues related to COVID have been addressed pretty well. One COVID issue which I wanted to bring to your attention now, the state, there are two conditions that have recently changed that offer us what I think is an opportunity. First condition is we have developed this phased hybrid plan, which allows some flexibility in time that we haven't had before, teacher preparation and planning time. And the second one is the State Board of Education made a waiver to their 180/990 requirement. In the past, they have allowed us to take 3 days off, 3 days of those 180 to use for professional development. They increased that by 3 days, so now there are 6 days that can be used for that. So considering those two changes, our proposal is to be a little more streamlined to you, and it involves changing the calendar. That's why it's coming to you. So the first proposal is that we adjust the calendar by removing the 3 previously scheduled professional development days. So you recall that during the year, usually a day after a holiday, we have taken a day off for all teachers to attend, but not students, and there's professional development over the course of that day. We're hoping that instead of doing those days and decreasing the amount of time that students would be in classes, that we could do the professional development on Fridays each month to do a 2.5-hour segment of professional development. And just so you know, in a larger context, we have tried to adjust our professional development support from our office really specifically to blended learning or digital learning this year, giving teachers direct resources, training, and time to do so. So we hope that that could give better continuity for the school year and take advantage of some time that we have in the buildings. So the first proposal would be changing the calendar just to remove those days. The second one is doing blended learning professional development on Fridays, recognizing there's still additional time. This is once a month we're proposing, so this would be 8 to 9 sessions a year. We are proposing that the school professional development coordinator, who works with our director of professional development, Dr. Karen Brock, that they work with their principals to devise precisely what they want, but we would be working on modules based on a recent book released by John Hattie and then Fisher and Fry, who are people we have been accustomed to working with and using. They've created a digital learning handbook, playbook they call it, that provides lots of choices. So schools would have some choice in what they did on that Fridays, and they would execute that with the support of our staff. The final consideration for you is based on feedback from teachers and principals. Were we to take off or convert those 3 days, we have an additional 3 days. There are great concerns unlike I've ever seen among principals about getting school going this year. They have been handicapped in getting some things going by no one's fault, but by the condition. Some schools have 50 to 60% of their students registered so far, meaning principals have got to make schedules, they've got to get people registered, they've got to assign classes, they've got to assign teachers, and there may be big changes coming in. Teachers, additionally, their biggest request on their, we had them surveyed after their PD time with the 12 hours, their biggest request is time and training on these things. So it's an option that you might, as you look at the recommendation there, the first recommendation is to change the student calendar to take off those PD days and convert them to regular student instruction days. The second recommendation we have is doing blended learning on professional development on Fridays, It's a joint effort between our office and school leaders. And then finally, you may consider, we'd have a net loss of 0 were we to convert those 3 instructional days. We would have had students out of school to the beginning of the year to start school on Monday, August 24th. We recognize there are lots of issues having to do with this, and you're talking with the community about that a lot. So I present that as an option that you might consider.
Are there any questions for Anne Marie?
Yeah, if we do this, are we pretty much saying that we have no hope of ever holding school on Fridays? Because it seems like we're getting rid of all our vacation days, we're moving professional development to Fridays. That only works if we're in the hybrid system, not if we go back to school every day. And so, I mean, what was it, 2 weeks ago, we were kind of led to believe that, okay, well, we're going to reevaluate it every 2 weeks, but if we do this, then we're going down the path of eliminating the chance to go back to the normal system.
Well, phase 2 also has, even though everybody's there together, it's Monday through Thursday. So we'll probably be in phase 2 for quite a while, I think.
Yeah, so phase 1 and 2 have the Friday schedule off. And I would think that as long as the need is existing for professional development on blended learning, our phase would reflect that. So if we're back and the vaccine's in and we're doing well, we can provide professional development another way. My guess is, and many others' guesses are, that we will either be in phase 1, phase 2, or working all digital for much of the year. That's wild speculation, but we can address, the elementary schools already have Friday early release every week so that they can do team planning and they can do professional development in those ways. So there's still opportunities. And after this, a principal still has opportunities to provide professional development. Nothing in this, to me, suggests that we're going to a 4-day week.
So I'm concerned about communicating with our families, especially at a distance, especially at the beginning of the year, especially with our most at need. We haven't heard from some of them, and those that reflected in that what's the advantage of putting that off until Monday instead of at least getting them in the building? And yes, school is not going to look like, maybe class assignments aren't finalized until Monday or the next week because we have to see, but I don't see how we're going to, if we keep staring at screens, I don't see how we're going to get some of our families without getting them there.
Sure. It's definitely a trade-off, and that's a trade-off that you would have to consider. I work mostly with teachers and principals, and I just want to accurately reflect their concerns and requests. And it is pretty universally that they're trying to do in about 6 days what they normally do all summer. And again, we know we're in unprecedented times. Teachers additionally are not just learning Canvas or whatnot, they're learning how do we walk in the halls again? How do I teach at a table again? There are just so many considerations, and we always hear that teachers want time. I present it just as an option to you. I know that you're hearing from the public more, and you have to weigh that concern against it. I think you've heard from some principals, and I just want to reflect what I'm hearing from them, that they are very concerned about trying to get functional school going on time. I will also say, Utah educators, the theme should be get or done, because they get it done. We will open when you ask us to open. They'll open positively, and they'll make it work. It's just, again, if we wanted to consider a net loss, we could think of it as a trade of days to help our employees get ready for school.
Do you want us to talk about it now or save it for the study session, or the business meeting of how we feel about it?
have a question, actually, Anne Marie. Is there a plan for if we decide not to start school 3 days late, what we're going to do with those 3 extra days?
We could just bank them. They would remain optional for us. So should we at some point during the year, it's not that we have to convert them to PD, it's just the state gave us flexibility to convert some of those. I think in the attempt to help some school districts with late starts, as many are considering. So really the proposal before you is 2 items. First one, changing the calendar. The second one is to allow us to do blended learning instead of on those PD days, do that professional development. And then I just wanted to mention that last consideration. There are many positives and negatives. We know that there aren't easy answers or right answers even at this point, but I'm reflecting what I've heard from our educators.
We'll wait until the business meeting to formally act on this. Are there any additional questions for Anne Marie?
Anne Marie, I was just curious, with the 12 hours that the teachers have spent over the last few weeks learning about the online learning platforms and things, what has the feedback been on that? Are they feeling more comfortable?
Sure, let me look up the precise, I got a report on that today, so I want to just find the exact data. Okay, so we, as of today, we have 78% of our teachers engaged in that learning. They have entered there at some point in their 12 hours of coursework. 24% of our teachers have completed it. In addition to the log, there's a kind of a learning log and survey at the end. And then just one piece of data that might be interesting to you is that 86% of the teachers that have completed the courses indicated that the Canvas course was very useful. That was 50%, 57%, or useful, 29%. So while no one loves learning a new thing, especially on a timeline, I can tell you, even one of my own staff members who was reticent to do this has told me, once I've learned it, it's an amazing tool. And so I think it's got a learning curve, but once people understand a few elements in it, they're much more familiar with it. We've, as a department, built in some critical supports into the Canvas system, pre-making some templates and blueprints. So teachers have a lot of work already done as they go to it. There's still the possibility that teachers can work through Google Classroom if they're just not comfortable jumping into it. So we feel pretty good overall about it. Lots of questions and lots of.
Let me add, Anne Marie, that we've opened up a lot of the time that we normally structure professional development at the beginning of the year so the teachers can use this time to prepare, and that includes working through the 12 hours of the online course.
Right. So tomorrow, a half a day is devoted to this. We just have some resources we're putting out. The 17th, half of a day is devoted to this. And we'll look forward to more feedback as we get into it. It's one of those areas that I think, again, having a monthly opportunity to meet with teachers on Fridays would be better than waiting until a further scheduled date for PD days.
Any additional questions? If not, thank you, Anne Marie. And Superintendent, thank you.
Thank you to my team for trying to navigate this very, very strange and uncharted territory.
Do you want me to address my other item now? It's one that was skipped earlier.
Why don't you go ahead and take care of item G,
Okay.
and then we'll come back to item L.
Okay. Very quickly, as we provide curricular support for teachers as they're teaching, we ran into a little bit of a hiccup this year. As you know, academic committees really drive the study and recommendation for purchase of materials. A few years, we have in the past had purchases separate for elementary and secondary. We're now using the state model, which has them together. However, there is a lag between contracts. So the secondary math teachers last time recommended that middle school teachers get on their program Big Ideas. and we plan to do that. The old contract was expiring. However, due to the fact that budgets have been impacted pretty greatly and we can't get the new program for them without buying at least a 3-year contract, that's pretty cost prohibitive. So what we're proposing to you is that we extend the old program's contract by 1 year. Additionally, that helps those teachers from not having to learn something new at this point and gives us more flexibility with our budgets in the coming year. Anything further?
This is an important approval for stability purposes for our math teachers.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Did we discuss policy 3400?
Doug presented on it. I can talk
That's
about it
what I
briefly
thought.
if you'd like.
We'll take care of that
In the
at the same
business
time,
meeting.
yeah. Stephanie, would you address item L, please? Large donation.
My mic has to be on for a second before I can talk. That's what I was told. Okay, we have a large donation to bring to the board. As you know, our policy 6110 requires any donations above $50,000 be brought to the board's attention. Mostly that's to ensure equity across the district. Chad has a tech vendor who would like to donate 20 75-inch screens, correct me if I'm wrong, Chad, 20 75-inch screens to our tech department to be distributed throughout the district for audiovisual needs. It's valued at about $51,000, so we are bringing it to you for your approval.
Chad, anything else that you would like to add?
This is a vendor that we've worked with a lot in the past. Most of our TVs in our schools are touch panels, what we call them, touch panel TVs, are the same model. So it's one that we're already using. They were acquired by a bigger company, and then they're kind of downsizing this portion of their company, so they had extra ones. Some are refurbished, some are brand new, but overall, you know, a great addition to a few of our buildings. So probably end up going to schools that we hadn't planned on putting them in, but we will now, Wasatch and a few like that we're waiting potentially on a bond, but now without that, we're short. You know, we have old projectors and things like that. So, you know, obviously we'd request that you accept this. So thank you.
And just based on procurement law, you know, we can accept this from a vendor because if we go to make further purchases and that vendor is involved, anything over 500 has to have quotes and bids. Anything over 10,000 has to have written bids. So while some people may question, is this a conflict of interest because they're donating and then they may come back to us for more work, based on procurement law and our policies, we should still have a process to eliminate any of that conflict of interest.
Okay, thank you. And this will be an action item in our business meeting. Superintendent, would you take care of item H, a COVID-19 update, and then any additional comments on policy 3400?
I think we've covered that. So we'll, regarding policy 3400, again, that's a new policy we're proposing. We've worked with the health department on this regarding language, and it's regarding the use of masks and face coverings, I think is the term they use, face coverings in our schools.
Were there any additional questions about policy 3400? And Board Member Partridge, thank you for the editorial changes before our meeting today. Item J, and McKay, you can kind of help make sure we get this okay. Rebecca is going to be the region delegate, and that means as a district, we also get a delegate. Is that correct, McKay?
That's right. You get one more vote. So
that's wonderful that we get two this year. In as much as Melanie at our USBA conference in January was voted to be an alternate, if Melanie is willing and the board is amenable, I would suggest that Melanie go as our district representative. And of course, anyone else on the board would be willing and welcome to go also. But those who would be voting would be Board Member Nielsen and Board Member Hall if she goes as our district representative, unless there's someone who has just a real burning desire.
Well, I'm going to go, but I'm fine to let Melanie be our
Well,
delegate.
I was planning on going anyway, too, so.
We tend to vote as a block, but, so, and I, on the voting day, actually won't be there, so I have to be out of state, but it's a good agenda. The Speaker and the Senate President will come the evening before, and it's always good to keep them in line, so.
And you should have in your board docs documents that Bonnie sent out prior to this meeting, a copy of the agenda for that meeting. And I would invite you to take a look at that so you're aware of the topics that will be discussed. Thank you, Melanie, and Jennifer, thank you for being willing to go. I would direct your attention to our consent calendar. That contains information from our last board meeting. Our Google Calendar items, what do we have, Melanie?
We've got our joint Provo City Council meeting coming up on Thursday at noon, and another study session coming up on August 25th at 7:30 in the morning.
Okay, thank you very much. We have reached the end of our study session agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We're adjourned. We've got about 6 minutes.